Do you dare to make changes? Do you dare to go ahead and do stuff without knowing what it precisely involves and how it's going to work out? You just know that something needs to change and you're about to go do it. Well, that's what we're going to talk about this Friday Night Live. And you know the story. I need to change quickly for a sec. So Instagram knows that I'm live too. So here I am again. Well, Friday Night Live, it looks back on the week. I look back on the week. And this week was about experimenting. Now, I'm not particularly fond of experimenting, but at some point I was talking to some people about trauma and trauma therapy. And unfortunately, we concluded that a lot had to do with experimenting. And quite honestly, when I talked to one of those people today, she said, yeah, well, it's true. I felt like an experiment. But looking back on the other things that I talked about this week and that I actually did. So you must have noticed that there's a checkerboard visible again on Instagram. It's not like I've never done it, but just like I stopped going live every week when I went to Chicago in 2022, I also stopped doing the checkerboard. Can you believe it? I was like, oh my God, that was another one of those things that I stopped doing. I didn't realize it until I looked back. One of the other things that I started doing was, well, the checkerboard basically consists of quotes and then usually videos, quotes, or pictures, whatever. I decided to check out the YouTube vertical live streaming. Well, I can tell you that was quite interesting. And the most interesting thing was that if you want to save it to your device, it doesn't work for me. And it took like ages before it was actually visible on YouTube itself. So I was like, this is not working for me. So what I did like about it was the fact that I did get response from people. And quite honestly, I had these headphones on at first and I forgot to turn them off. So I was like, people say the sound is bad, but why is the sound bad? Until I realized that the sound was recorded by this thing, which of course was somewhere on this desk. Well, apart from that, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to experiment doing vertical in StreamYard. So no, I'm not doing it today, but yesterday I did together with Cheeky Joe. The goal was to have her here today, but she was so immensely tired that she said, no way. So I've been experimenting with the time a little bit. The goal was to start an hour earlier, so she would be awake. Well, she wasn't. Like I said again, she's way too tired. She's still battling with her health and everything. So, but it was kind of nice to be experimenting yesterday on StreamYard, and the result was that we made it late. It was early morning, so that's also the result, or the reason that she's not here. I guess I sort of have to blame myself a little bit because I should have sent her off. It was so nice to actually talk to her about so many things. And we had a blast. I'll honestly say we had a blast. So, something else I did, I have been trying to start up a team multiple times. And I don't know, for some reason, it doesn't seem to work. So maybe I'm not specific enough. I guess I'm not specific enough. I think I'm specific enough. The other person thinks they know what I want. And well, the reality is it doesn't work out. But I asked someone to help me out with shorts. And so far, so good. She helped me out with the timestamp. So, well, hopefully that's an experiment that is going to work out very well. Now, one of the other things when it comes to experimenting is I want to write a number of stories. Well, I don't think articles is probably better. Let's say posts on LinkedIn about a pyramid from Lencioni. So you might have heard me talk about it. I'm not sure. But they talk about organizations and the change they want in organizations. And they talk about it from a negative point of view. So they want to see how they can improve the communication in organizations. And I had been talking to my brother a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I want to do something with it. So I talked to a friend about it, and then just recently was my coach again. And I was like, I'm just going to take each layer and just write my perspective. And, one of the things that I want is not just to learn people to speak up and speak out, but I also want to create that ripple effect. And some of you may know that one of my goals is to actually create trips. So I want to create a trip in Chicago, one in Florida, one in, I think, California, probably San Diego, and one in Europe prior to Christmas. And the people I would like to come over are people who in turn also are going to create a ripple effect. And well, I was like, hey, maybe one will also link to the other, as in, if I know how to reach the right people, and I'm personally thinking about business owners of small businesses where HR is something that's like, yeah, we are not going to get any HR department because, we are with too little people. There's not enough staff. And I still believe that conversations, meetings, talking about, hey, how are things going? How's progress? But also, what have you achieved this last year? Or how did you do this last year? Those things are very important. But also, when it comes to, okay, so what can you do to challenge one of your employees, but in a good way, like help them evolve in skills you can nurture, so they're suitable for your company, but on the other hand, it's something very specific for that person, and it might not even be something that you hired them for, but it could be something that it's like not just challenging the employee, but also giving them something to work on that they really like. Well, I've got a lot of ideas when it comes to all of that. And when it comes to experimenting, yeah, that's experimenting too. Okay, but the main thing that I got to talk about and which really got to me is trauma therapy. And quite honestly, I'm not only going to talk about trauma therapy, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I see happening at schools nowadays. And both of those things are actually, well, they have the same cause. There is a lack of personnel. And that's a problem. So we don't have personnel that's skilled enough, experienced enough. Those who are experienced are, well, a lot of them either quit or they, they suffer from burnout or whatever it is because of all the stress that they are experiencing. And of course, there's a lot of change nowadays. So let's start to think about or consider the topic of trauma. That didn't really come out right now, did it? Okay, so I talked to a client of mine about trauma therapy. I actually was the one who said, go do something about it. I actually say to a lot of my clients, when I know that something is going on, when I notice they have PTSD, and also to my friends, same stuff. I tell them, find someone. So usually a lot of people end up with EMDR. And depending on where they get the support, here in the Netherlands, they will get paid for it. I mean that they don't have to pay for it themselves. But there are a lot of variations, and there's usually a very long waiting list unless it's a pretty recent trauma. Well, I've heard several stories. Some people are so completely happy. They said, yeah, I've been working on it. I've really been, they prepare themselves for going there and really feeling everything and going through it. Others said, well, doesn't really work for me and there's too much going on. But I gave it a try. And then there are those who, well, they actually need something completely different. So you can also do stuff which directly influences the brain. So you use certain pulses to try and change things. But when we talk about EMDR and exposure therapy, so basically getting into the trauma and reliving it, that's quite a task by itself. So at first, being exposed to it, it can make things worse because you start reliving it over and over again. Now, the whole goal of the trauma therapy is, of course, that you actually get desensitized. So at some point, you realize, like, hey, this is not something that I'm experiencing right now. It is something from the past. And by showing your brain that, that danger is gone, things can change. But of course, the question is, how do we do it? So EMDR uses lights, sometimes sound, sometimes tapping. And it's a way to get your brain to do something else while you're going through it. And like I said, for some people it works, for some people it doesn't work. And sometimes, like I said, they combine it with exposure therapy. And it's the latter that feels kind of experimental to me. And now I'm not going to say that this applies for everyone. But do you remember when I said a lot of people nowadays, they, the really good ones, the really experienced ones, the question, of course, is, are they still working as a therapist or a psychologist or, whatever it is they do? And a lot of people, because of there's a lack of people actually doing the job, And there are so many people who are dealing with trauma nowadays that, it's out of balance. Hence why the waiting time is so long. So when I talked to one of my clients this week, she said, it doesn't feel good. I'm constantly reliving it. And I said, well, that's weird, because I would have expected that there would have been a break on your end. So normally you go to a safe place, a safe space, just to have a break from it. So you go into the trauma, you rate it 1 to 10, and then when you really have immersed yourself in it and it's too much and you cannot handle it anymore, you go straight to a safe space. Well, apparently with exposure therapy, there is no break. And well, that didn't sit really well with me, because I'm like, hey, what if you get stuck in that trauma and you cannot get out anymore because it's like too much, too long? And well, my client actually experienced such a moment that it just was too much. So when we were talking about it and she told me what was going on, one of the things that she told me was actually that people, she felt like they were reading the same thing over and over again, regardless of which therapist was working with her. And I was like, well, that doesn't sound good. And she said, well, I don't like that. I like people to be people instead of literally saying whatever it is. So when I used the word experiment and I talked to her about it today, she said, yeah, that's what I felt like. I felt like being experimented on, and it didn't feel good. Well, the good news is that at some point they had a conversation about how things were going. So in between the 2 days, so she has 4 days in total, and those are long days. We're not talking about a 1 hour session. Well, per trauma, it's 2 hours, 1 hour of exposure therapy and 1 hour of EMDR. But in total, we are talking about 8 traumas, so 2 per day. That's a lot. And I don't know if she was aware it was going to be like this. No, let me scratch that. She wasn't aware that it was going to be like this. So when she told me it was going to be 4 sessions, I was like, 4 sessions? That's weird. So then I called them and they explained it was 4 days. Okay. And then they told me, yeah, we're going to do some exercising and other stuff. So I was under the impression that this was the moment that you can actually let go. So, take a break, have a rest. But that's not the case. As a matter of fact, it's still being exposed to the trauma, because you might be doing something that is supposed to be safe, but you still have to think about the whole trauma. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. There's no break. So you start, say, at 9 in the morning, you finish, say, at 10 at night. And all this time, you are focusing on traumas. So basically 2 traumas. And that's a lot. It's, being back there where things happen and then hearing extra sounds and other stuff. I mean, it's called trauma for a reason. And here's the thing. What I heard was that initially they would take a break and they would do like yoga and stuff. And then the next day they didn't do it anymore. And she had to figure it out herself. And I was like, wow. So when we got to talk today, it wasn't just about trauma, but it was basically about she feeling like she was experimented on. Yeah, but most people, an hour is enough. Have you ever considered that this might be a very complex trauma? And they knew because, there were tests beforehand and there were talks beforehand. So they knew it wasn't easy. And hence why they said, okay, we're going to do it like full force going in, which on the surface sounds really good. But then when I realized that they said, well, but we cannot help you figuring out what you need to do to relax. And I was like, but that's not good. So it's not only that they just don't just go to a safe space, they basically wouldn't know how. So they give you one thing one day, and for all the other stuff, well, there's YouTube, there's Google, go find something. Well, I'm no fan of hearing that people don't know this. And, just to go from one thing to the other, like I said, the same thing happens in school systems. So in this day and age where we have a lot of information online and we have a lack of teachers and we have a lack of teachers with the right skills, and we also have a lack of teachers who are equipped to deal with current day kids. I mean, if you've been doing it for like 30 or 40 years, things have changed in that time. I mean, when I went to school, things were very different compared to nowadays. I mean, there was no internet. We had to go to a library. We had to photocopy things. And nowadays, there's the computer. And, things can be printed, things can be explored. So, we would go to the library and we would find a book and, several books, and then we would do our project. And now that's totally different. The thing is, though, is it okay that at school, and especially when we're talking about specializing in certain things, so after high school, so when you go to college and university, that people, well, no, not necessarily university, but before that, especially when you're doing something hands-on, that they say, go check your book, go find it on the computer. And I'm like, but what if they don't understand? Well, we explained it. And, that whole thing of the non-communicating, just saying, yep, well, that's the way it is. And, go ask your classmates. It's what I hear all the time is there's a lack of communication. There's a lack of understanding. And people don't seem to care about what's going on. It's like, well, this is what you get and you have to deal with it. And of course, during COVID, it was way worse. All of a sudden, students got training online. It was a new way of getting training. And, well, a lot of students and children missed out on proper education. And with proper education, I mean, like, really knowing what is going on and, like, really getting an understanding. And I can tell that with the lack of teachers, but also was not always being able to be there. So one teacher maybe has to go and help out 2 different classes. And you also might have, for the younger ones, 2 teachers on one group, one for one day in the week and the other for the other day in the week or days in the week. And each might have their own way of teaching stuff, but not talk to one another about it. And the thing is, and this also is true for the whole trauma treatment, is what if you are dealing with people who are a little bit different? Maybe they are a little slower, maybe they are a little smarter, maybe they have a different way of looking at things and understanding things. And I guide a number of people. I talk to the schools and I explain why they actually cannot deal with what's being offered and what they actually need. And when I do, it usually works out quite well. And fortunately, there are some school systems, I'm not sure if I should say it like that, but they are more specialized. They specialize the training so certain people can understand it better. It's especially when we are dealing with people, not only just with mental issues or a different way of perceiving things, but also with physical limitations, which cause them to have less energy compared to other people. It's nice that if you know where to find them, there are possibilities for the young ones out there to actually get a degree in something that they want. So getting back to the whole school system, but also the whole trauma treatment, we are dealing with a day with an age where, well, of course, people get older. There's more expected of people. And I don't know. It seems like we went from one to completely the opposite. So I still remember growing up that, well, there was no computer. Like I said, we had to go to the library. And my first job, well, no, that's not true. My holiday jobs, which is actually true, where I worked in IT already. It was completely new, and we had those literally floppy disks. And later on, the smaller one, which was from hard plastic. So then you have an idea about which time we are talking about. But I also was at a job where, you did everything by hand. You didn't use the computer. Think about mortgages. It was all done on paper and it needed to be checked. And that was the time that people would check, like, oh, you've written a letter. Okay, let me check the spelling. Oh, let me send it for you. I'll put it in an envelope, put stamp on it, and make sure that it gets sent off. And in the years that I've been working, of course, I saw it change and more was expected from us. Things that, were not relevant for the jobs we did, but, it was, everybody could do it themselves. That's the whole reasoning. And, it's too expensive to have people do certain stuff for you. So it all needs to be automated, less people and more done more efficiently. But the thing is that it also leads to so many impressions. It's like you're constantly stimulated with what's going on. And that's also part of this day and age. It's about, okay, if we have to do it as efficient as possible, let's put as many people on the floor as we can. What was that again? Separations. So, at some level, there was something good about COVID because all of a sudden we would separate from one another and actually be able to have our own space, which is nice. You don't want to be able to hear the phone calls from the person next door. And quite honestly, when I'm on the receiving end and I talk to someone, and in the meanwhile I hear voices in the background and hear this typing, I cannot concentrate anymore on the whole conversation. It's kind of distracting. So when we go back to the whole school system and everything that's going on, a lot has been influenced, of course, by using computers, the information age. A lot has been influenced because it all needs to be done more efficiently, which primarily had to do with stockholders. A lot has to do with, there's not enough money to do certain things. And well, we need cut back somewhere. So where are we going to cut back? And as a result, with too few people, the stress gets too much, and they get ill. They stop doing this job. They basically quit it because, well, who wants to do a job with too much stress? But who are the people who are exposed to this? You have to deal with the lack of skilled people. And well, that's basically what we're talking about. And when I talked about the whole experimenting thing, this is about students, it's about employees, it's about children who no longer get the support that they need. Now, if you've seen me before, then you know that I talk a lot about speaking up and speaking out and sharing your story. And because everything has to be as efficient nowadays, a lot of people don't have the time anymore, which also leads to a lot of confusion. So because people don't ask on anymore and they don't get an impression of what's going on, and of course, when you are the one visiting someone else, say that we're talking about medical staff and you're the patient, you can feel that there's only so much time. So how eager are you to share your story? And how willing are they to actually ask you all those questions? It's, those are things that I talk about a lot with the people. And, usually when I help the clients, because they need to learn to speak up and speak out, it's one big package, especially the young ones out there. Something has happened. They need to be examined on some level, whether it's because of mental issues or physical issues. And they need to express what it is they need. So I'm teaching people to think about what it is they need. So usually when I talk to them about it, I do get the information because I can take the time. Then we sort of make like a list of things that need to be considered and needs to be discussed. And the cool thing is that basically when you do so, it helps in every form of conversation, whether it's going to the hospital, whether it's going to school. It's about making the most of the short amount of time that you've actually got. And I don't know if you remember this, but last week I was sort of in a similar situation. I had to do it for myself. And I was going back and forth between, but how does this work? How do I explain that sometimes I can walk, say, for a mile? Usually I cannot walk that much further. I don't do it quick. I don't have the speed other people have. I need to be very careful. And there's a lot of resting also when it comes to those things. So fortunately, I live in a country where we have bikes, and bikes usually go a lot quicker. Of course, I also live in a country where there's a lot of rain, so I'm no fan of rain. So getting back to what happened to me, or with me, well, not to me. I was just a patient who was going to talk to a doctor, so he would advise whether or not I needed a handicapped parking card. And he wanted to know if I could walk about 33 feet. That's the standard here in the Netherlands. If you can't, then, you get that card. And quite honestly, I've had it for 5 years. And every time I'm like, how, when, where do they come up with that standard? Because let's face it, I always have to walk beyond the 33 feet because there are not enough parking spaces for the handicapped parking to actually be able to go somewhere within that distance. Distance is always further away. But anyway, this was about there are moments that I can do things and there are moments that I cannot do things. There are moments that I can walk a short distance and there are moments that I just can't do it. And well, I was like, how do I get that information across? So I collected everything. I asked my physical therapist, way in advance actually, to come up with a letter. We discussed how it actually worked. And so I prepared. And that's the thing. I think that nowadays, when it comes to dealing with a limited amount of time, that we need to prepare. But what if you do not know how to do it? What if you don't know how to ask which questions? So when I talked to my client about trauma therapy, she literally said, well, I want to say something, but I have to be respectful. Of course, you need to be, you don't want to yell at them or scream. And especially when you're traumatized, that can happen. But you do want to talk about what's going on. So when she told me there was a possibility to discuss this, I said, that's good. And otherwise, I probably would have picked up the phone and actually called myself, or I would have sent an email. But because we went through it together, she knew what she wanted to say, and she got some answers. And some were not very satisfying, like you have to sort it out yourself. And others were like, yeah, usually we get it done within one session. And well, at least she got to express what she was dealing with. And I think that was already a big win. So the good news was that they also said, at the end of everything, we're going to see what you still need, and then we'll see what we're going to do. It's just that in advance and during, there was no communication. There was no explanation what was going on. And the people who were doing certain things, they didn't seem too interested either. I mean, when you're basically reading a book and then someone is looking in the camera for 5 minutes and you don't notice it, I mean, really? That's not really good. And, whereas I applaud that it can be done online because, well, we're not always capable of traveling. How do you deal with someone who is really scared at the moment? How do you get them out of a certain situation? And that's why I was thinking about the whole experimenting and the experimentation. Like, hey, do they actually know what they're doing when it comes to really complex people? And that got me straight back to schools and students, because that same question also applies to them. And then I'm going to make a big jump. Do you remember that at the beginning of this broadcast, I was talking about one of the things that I want to do, which is teaching people to speak up and speak out in organizations, specifically business owners, in small companies. So what I've seen and learned over the years that I was still an employee. So back in the days that it was like, oh, you're good at something? Awesome. You become a team leader. So they didn't have any people skills. And they were supposed to lead the team. And, that caused a lot of frustration. And I remember that back in the day, I was already thinking, like, this is interesting. This person is the most horrible manager that I can come up with or think about. Later on, I learned that there were far more worse managers, even. So it was no exception. And then I was like, but he's a father too. So how does he do it? Taking care of his kids. He must be a loving father. And that discrepancy in people, so being able to do one thing at in a certain way where they're not interested in people, and then at the same time being the family man. I'm just talking about men in general now, so it could also be a woman at home. I was like, that that always was a little puzzling to me. But of course, the same thing applies to people with small businesses. They start up their own business. At some point, they need a team. They start hiring people, but they still haven't learned to do certain things. So how do you deal with that? And especially when there's no HR department who usually are specialized in these kind of things, then how do you communicate with your staff? What if they don't listen to you? What if they don't understand what's important to you and why it is? So they do things they think they know how to do best. And what I really want to do is I want to help those people, to train them to listen to what other people need and also get across what it is they want others to do, but also see them for the people they are and, really appreciate them and being able to, like I said, challenge them a little bit, but in a good way. So they feel like, oh, yeah, these are my skills. And, oh, I didn't know I could do that, but that's kind of cool that, this is something I can work on and explore and do. And at the same time, it's valuable for the company too. Now, getting back to the whole trauma thing and the whole experimental stuff going on. I was listening today to some lessons from Brendon Burchard. So for those who don't know, he's one of those experts when it comes to personal development and also marketing. And he wrote a book called The Charge. And the CD is about The Charge. Well, actually, I don't know if the book is called The Charge. But he has this coaching program about it. And since I'm part of that coaching program, I was like, you know what? Living the Charge live. Let's listen to it. So it's kind of nice that I stumbled upon the CDs. And it's a nice way to listen to it, when I'm driving. And my coach, she asked me a number of things which are part of that program. And it has to do, are we leading a charged life, a comfortable life, or a caged life? Caged, comfortable, or charged life. So caged, you basically do what other people tell you to do. Comfortable, it's about, okay, but you don't really do much to challenge yourself. And then there's the charged life where you are actually challenging yourself and changing yourself. And I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds like that whole experimenting again. Now here, what's happening is I'm following a lot of training being given by him or by other people in his company. And they ask us questions and they teach us certain things on how to do certain things. So I tend to say do things one step at a time, but it's also important to not just listen to things, but actually experiment with it. Now, remember when I said that when people go to school, nowadays, a lot of teachers just leave them be, go check out Google, YouTube, figure out how it works. And when you don't have any support, then of course the question is, how am I going to do this? So you hear about it and you may get some pointers, but in the end, you still have to do it. So of course, there's this model where they say, okay, it can be done for you, it can be done with you, or you do it yourself. One is very expensive, the other one is relatively cheap. And a lot of people who are new at certain things still don't have the money or don't have the money yet to actually buy the very difficult of the very expensive programs where it's done for you. And, when I learned or heard about a lot of things back in the days, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I should do it. But then, of course, always the question was, how am I going to do it? And when am I going to do it? And, well, then we get back to the concept of team. And like I said, I've learned that there are people who want to do stuff. And then when they are there, then all of a sudden they start explaining things in a way that I'm like, oh, no, this is not me. So I used to be at a fairground where I would talk about coaching. I would be speaker. And then when people would come to my spot, my place, my stand, they would be there and they would explain things in a way that I was like, oh my God, you have no clue what you're talking about. But, it's nice that there's someone there to help you out. And I've experienced that over and over and over again. And at some point I was like, no, I need to do this on my own. And then, of course, you realize that you cannot do it all on your own. So the question always remains like, hey, how do we express ourselves and what it is we want, and how can we find people who actually have the skills that we need them to have? Well, I'm lucky. I found someone and I realized that she was listening to everything I was talking about anyway. So I was like, hey, you know what? If you're listening anyway, then maybe you can help me out with telling me the timestamps so I can make shorts out there. Which, of course, leads me to experimenting with, okay, there are different platforms. Let's see what I can do with the shorts. And, YouTube is primarily a long-form content platform, so longer than 10 minutes. Well, I'll honestly say I usually don't have the patience to listen to something for a very long time. But, every now and then I do, especially when I'm in the car listening to stuff. That's why I like audiobooks. And I certainly don't have the patience to listen to my entire videos. So when they're a little shorter, yes, I do. But when they're longer, like right now, an hour, nah. But when I actually can find someone who is willing, or, they're listening anyway, then why not take advantage of it and ask them, if there's something that speaks to you and stands out, would you be willing to let me know what it is? And that way I can experiment with that shorts on the different platforms and see what works. So right now, for instance, I'm doing this live, and this live is broadcasting on YouTube, long form content platform. It's also broadcasting on Facebook, and it's broadcasting on Instagram. The advantage of Instagram for me is that I can actually easily save it. And fortunately for me, using StreamYard, I can save it too. So that's the whole goal behind using this streaming service. But then again, Instagram is not for long form content. So when I recently started doing those quotes out there and I saw the numbers go up, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And also posting short form content on YouTube. And I recently started doing a post and I started doing vertical live streams and seeing that people actually liked it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I've known for a while that it's important to take out the little bits and pieces. They call it circular virality. Well, actually, that's what Brendon Burchard calls it. So it's reusing what you already have and knowing that I don't have the patience for it. I'm so happy that I've found someone who is willing to actually, I mean, because she's doing it anyway, listening to it, who's actually willing to tell me, okay, this is where you need to go. So I can easily edit it, take that little piece out, and then make it into something new. Now, getting back to the caged and the comfortable and the charged life, a lot of these things that I'm talking about are way out of our comfort zone. Whether it is learning new stuff, whether it's setting up a team, whether it's dealing with trauma therapy, all of these things are things like, should I just leave it the way it is? Or do I want change? So when I started making this, and this must be the exception that I actually made this and didn't use it until now, I first wanted to write experiment in there. And then I was like, no, this is change which should be in there. So I wrote down initially time on one side, courage on the other one, and then experiments and mindsets on here. And then I was like, I'm not sure if this makes sense because, yeah, it's about experimenting. And yeah, it's still about the time because we don't change overnight, you know, especially when we talk about habits and learning new stuff and tweaking and changing. It takes time. But I was also like, yeah, that courage aspect, that's something that's really true. And especially when it's uncomfortable, you don't know what you are about to experience, then yes. But it was about that other part, you know, the habits and the mindsets, because, you know, we're talking about learning new skills, developing new mindsets, developing new habits. So we change, or we want change, so things are working out better for us. But of course, we need to figure out, does it actually work for us the way that we hope it will work out? And to continue doing stuff again and again and again, not knowing if it's going to work out, that requires a lot of courage. So when we talk about the caged life, it's basically a life that you don't want to live, but you do it because you've been brought up a certain way. And when we talk about trauma, we talk about abuse, we talk about dominance, then of course we are talking about someone being, whether, well, it can be physically, but it can also be mentally caged, as in, if you teach someone, whether it's by force or by the way they talk down, or by checking up on you, or by gossiping, whatever it is, there are so many ways that you can make someone feel really small, then, that's when we talk about the cage life. So this is about being able to break free. And sometimes we need support. And then we get back to basically the whole topic of this broadcast. But what if there is no support because the people are not skilled enough, because there are not enough people who know about it? What if there's not enough time and everybody wants to have a piece of the pie, but it's at the expense of quality? Well, the comfortable is basically, like I said, it's nice. You don't really need to change, but the charged life is about really going for it. And I dare say that lately I am going in that direction. I'm challenging myself nonstop, also because I'm being coached, but also because I'm coaching other people to change things. So for years, I've been listening to several people, and I don't know why it's now. Maybe because the urgency is more than ever. But all of a sudden, things are changing. And a year ago, I started giving group training. And I think that because I'm teaching others, that I also want to, I'm challenging myself to train them in a better way, to coach them in a better way, to take it all to the next level. And, it's a cool thing that with someone like Brendon Burchard, I hope I'm not saying his name too many times for you. But he's really good at what he does. So yeah, I'm proud to say that I'm following a lot of his training. But because I've been listening to him, I can quickly pick up on the stuff that he's talking about because I know his line of thinking. And it's kind of nice to actually be like, okay, there's this professional guy, he's a role model. And if I can be a role model for other people, and again, causing that ripple effect, leaving a legacy, that's kind of cool. If I can do it, and people get a better life. And I'm not just talking about one client or a couple of clients, but actually, if we can influence, or I can influence an entire generation and the next one and the next one, oh my God, that would be so cool. And that's one of the reasons that I come back to business owners, specifically those who cannot communicate, so they need to learn to speak up and speak out, who not only are dealing with employees, and let's face it, you can make them or break them when it's no fun to be there, and when you feel constant pressure and people are bullying you. Then again, you can always leave, but of course the question is, can you, or do you need the money too badly? So you keep on doing what you want to do or what you need to do, but not want to do any longer. Well, if I can change that, and so there's a better vibe going on in companies, and people feel seen and heard and understood, and at the same time, so do the managers and the business owners. Wouldn't that be amazing? And of course, do you remember that I talked about people being family persons? So they likely have a family besides being a manager, on the job, and being able to communicate in a different way and act in a different way depending on whether it's related to their family or to the job. Well, if you learn to speak up and listen and look at people from a different angle and be open for change and be open for criticism, which also can be a positive thing, that will also influence family life. And, when it influences your partner and your kids, and they will at some point start to work somewhere and also have their own family, it would make such a big difference. But also, when we talk about them going to school or study, when they learn to communicate better and express themselves and ask about what it is they need, oh my God, the world will be a different place. So today was about experimenting, and the one thing that I can only say, no, not only say, what I say over and over and over again is it's so important to speak up about what it is you need. Speak out if you don't agree with things. Write it down. Explain why you need it. That's the part of share your story. Find support. Find someone who understands you and can help you understand what's needed for you. And if you know people who need that support, be there, or at least find someone who can help them. When we can get to express what it is we need, and we can get others to understand what it is we need, and in turn also understand what they can offer us, it would already make such a difference in so many people's lives. So make sure that you find support and that you're not only relying on Google and YouTube. Fortunately, it's out there and we learn a lot of stuff, but there's no such thing as personal contact. If you can use some coaching, one-on-one or group training, I do group coaching every Tuesday, and I teach people to speak up and to speak out. So we get into all those topics which have to do with, hey, why don't you get to the point where you want to be? What is it you need? You have a goal, you have a dream, but how do we do it? I use meditation too, and it's a nice way to get back to your dreams and also get back to the inner kid, the kid who still had the dreams and is still very playful. And also to the future version of yourself who actually knows how things work and what they want. Well, just find me, let me know, and I'll make sure that you can join the group coaching training and maybe even one-on-one, depending on what it is you want and need. Anyway, thank you for being here. And if you have some ideas about the whole experimenting, then please leave a comment so I can work with that stuff and then get into it with the next live that I'm doing.